Ladies and gentlemen, let's give a big Springfield welcome to Dr. Glenn Poshard.
Folks, I thought I'd just share with you perhaps this morning some lessons that I've learned along the way in being in public service for most of my life. I hope they have some meaning for you. They're important to me. In 1960, in August of 1960, in the little rural Baptist church in which I grew up in southern Illinois, we had an itinerant, Jonathan Edwards, grace our pulpit. And we had a custom in our little church, being a rural coal mining community, of having visiting ministers who were traveling through the community preach sermons on Sunday. It wasn't unusual at all. And this gentleman got up in front of our church and proceeded in the most indignant and vociferous tone to say that if John Fitzgerald Kennedy was elected President of the United States, the Pope would rule America. And he went on and on and on. And our little church wasn't used to hearing that sort of prejudice preached from the pulpit. And my father, who only had one arm, was disabled, but who had talked to us on many occasions about ignoring those artificial boundaries that people put up to divide themselves from one another. My father, at the end of that church service, went up to this gentleman and put his arm on his shoulder, and I was standing about 6 or 7 feet away from my dad. And I heard my father say to this gentleman, "Sir, you are not welcome in this church any longer, preaching that kind of prejudice. We don't want to hear it. It's not necessary. So I'm asking you not to come back again." Now, my dad loved Harry Truman because Harry Truman had been the first American president to integrate the armed forces. And my father, who had told us that principle was important, showed me that day that he not only talked the talk, he walked the walk. 6 feet away, my father gave me perhaps the greatest gift that any parent could ever give his child. And I've never forgotten it. Principle does matter. And it matters in government, just as it matters in every other walk of life. Standing here in Springfield, you cannot help but feel the presence of the greatest statesman in the history of the world who has ever lived, our President Lincoln. I've tried to read everything over my lifetime that I could read about President Lincoln, because who cannot admire the man? The war was over for all intents and purposes when the president was elected to his second term. We had won Gettysburg. Grant was chasing down Lee toward Appomattox. And the president was reelected. And thousands of people crowded in on his inauguration day to hear his speech. The place was full, and everyone expected the president, as they wanted, to put his foot on the throat of the South, to say, "Look, you're responsible for hundreds of thousands of our sons' death. You deserve to be punished. Now just do the job and wipe them out." And what did they hear? They heard Mr. Lincoln stand up and open his inaugural address, the greatest speech, I believe, ever written, with these words: "With malice toward none, with charity for all. Let us go forth to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for those who have borne the battle, and their widows and their orphans." There was no sense of vindictiveness no sense of retribution. The crowd began to leave before the speech was ever over. Because this wasn't what people deserved. Forgiveness shouldn't be in the vocabulary of the President of the United States. But it was. And it was the greatest lesson any of us in government could ever have been taught. And President Lincoln gave it to us. It's not a form of weakness to forgive. It is the greatest strength that any of us in government have. And our own legislative leadership needs to understand that at every level of government, because it is the only way to move our country and our state and our communities forward in the way that democracy is supposed to move.